My fiancée took my inheritance to launch her dream store. But months later, I made a move no one expected, and then she walked in like she owned the world, but with that quiet kind of charm only bookworms seem to carry. Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday night, she sat at the corner window table, ordering the same chamomile tea and spreading a small mountain of art history books across the table. Sticky notes stuck out from every direction, highlighters capped and uncapped, her fingers always moving. I noticed the way she read with intensity, not just scanning but absorbing like the material owed her something. I worked behind the counter back then, slinging lattes and cold brews in a small campus cafe on the edge of downtown Cincinnati. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to keep the lights on and the student loan sharks at bay. For a while, I just watched from a distance, always curious, never bold. Until one night, I finally said, "You know refills are free, right?" She looked up, almost startled, then blinked once like I'd broken some trance she'd been in. "Even for tea?" she asked, as if the idea was brand new. That was the first time we actually spoke. Nothing flashy, no big cinematic moment, just a few casual words between two overworked grad students trying to stretch their energy and dollars as far as possible. Her name was Lena. She was 26, doing her master's in art history, which I immediately pretended to know something about. She could talk for hours about obscure Renaissance painters, and I'd just nod along, half lost and fully captivated. It wasn't just the way she spoke, it was the fire behind her eyes when she did. I was 29, grinding through the final months of business school, waiting tables between classes and working part-time at a tax prep office on weekends. I didn't have time to date, and I sure didn't have the bandwidth to fall for someone, but she made it hard not to. Our first actual time hanging out wasn't even supposed to be a date. She invited me to a gallery opening after my shift one Friday, said she had a free pass, and didn't want to go alone. I figured, why not? Better than heading back to my apartment where my roommate had already preloaded a 6-hour gaming marathon and 2 bags of cheese puffs. The exhibit was different. Nothing but installations made from recycled plastics and fluorescent tubing. Definitely not my scene, but I wasn't really looking at the art anyway. I watched her move from piece to piece, not just observing but dissecting, explaining the symbolism like she was born for it. That was the first time I felt it. Not just interest, but genuine admiration. She saw beauty where I saw garbage, and somehow, she made me see it too. We kept seeing each other, slowly at first. Neither of us had time for anything messy, and I liked that we weren't trying to impress each other. When I graduated, I landed a decent job at a financial consulting firm, not Wall Street level money, but solid. The kind of work that looks good on a resume and slowly eats your soul with 70-hour weeks. Meanwhile, Lena stayed in school, grinding through her thesis while working part-time at a museum gift shop that barely paid enough for gas. She never complained. She always said her passion mattered more than the paycheck. I envied that. I liked numbers because they made sense. She loved art because it didn't have to. After about 1.5 years of dating, we moved in together. A basic 2-bedroom on the north side, decent lighting, peeling paint, and thin walls. We split rent 60-40, me paying more since my job allowed it, and she handled groceries and some of the smaller bills. It was the kind of arrangement that made sense without ever needing a big discussion. We built a quiet rhythm that felt sustainable, comfortable even. But even then, she talked about her boutique. Not in a braggy way, but like it was inevitable. She wanted to create a space that combined vintage fashion with local artwork, a shop that felt like both a gallery and a closet. A place where clothes tell stories, she'd say, eyes glowing as she laid out design sketches across our dining table. She showed me floor plans she'd drawn on grid paper, photos of reclaimed wood displays, ideas for pop-up events and artist collaborations. I was impressed. It wasn't just talk. She had a real business model tucked inside all the dreamy aesthetics. The only thing missing was the capital. Every time she hit that wall, she'd sigh and fold up her sketches like she was packing away a piece of herself. "No bank's going to take me seriously," she'd say. "Not with my major and no collateral." I didn't argue. She was probably right. Things changed when my aunt passed away. We weren't close, but she'd always said I had a good head on my shoulders, and when her will was settled, I ended up with just over $60,000. It wasn't life-altering, but it was the kind of money that can either sit in an index fund or quietly change the direction of your life if used wisely. I thought about saving it for a down payment, maybe putting some aside for a future wedding or a longer honeymoon someday. Lena didn't pressure me. In fact, she never brought it up at all. But one night, while she was sketching again on the couch, surrounded by swatches of fabric and open tabs on her laptop showing vintage supply vendors. I said, "What if we used some of that money to launch your boutique?" She froze, like I'd just suggested we rob a bank. "Are you serious?" she asked, cautiously, like it was too good to be real. "Why not?" I replied. "You've got everything but the funding." She hesitated, reminding me that it was my inheritance and that I'd planned to invest it. But I told her this was an investment, maybe not just in the business, but in us. I meant every word. Within a week, we were drawing up spreadsheets and researching small commercial spaces. I even looped in an old friend from business school who had experience launching retail startups. He offered to tweak her business plan and walked us through early cost projections. Everything was starting to feel real. We found a storefront on a quiet block that was beginning to fill up with small cafes and indie shops, just enough foot traffic to feel promising. The rent was affordable, the bones were solid, and Lena's excitement was infectious. I negotiated with the landlord, handled the contractor bids for renovations, and built a budget from the ground up. Meanwhile, she curated inventory, designed the space, and worked on branding. By the time we signed the lease, I'd spent a little over $50,000. We agreed I'd be a silent partner, and we signed a legal document making that official. My name was on the paperwork, not because I didn't trust her, but because I wasn't stupid. "This feels a little overboard," she said when we were signing everything at a local notary. "Maybe," I replied, "but I'd rather overdo it than wish I had." She nodded, kissed me on the cheek, and said she was proud of us. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to how she said us, because something in that word was already starting to change. We opened the doors to the boutique on a breezy Thursday morning in April. Lena had chosen the name Found and Thread, a mix of vintage charm and poetic flair. The paint was still drying in the back hallway. The shelves smelled of fresh lumber, and a mismatched set of thrifted mannequins stood proudly in the window like rebels refusing to match. She cried when we unlocked the door that first day, then laughed at herself for crying. I stood next to her and thought, for a brief, shining moment, that this was it. We were building something permanent. A life, a future, a shared vision. I was wrong. For the first month, things were smooth. I kept my job at the firm, but spent weekends at the shop helping with bookkeeping, making supply runs, and troubleshooting the clunky website. Lena, to her credit, poured herself into the store completely. She had a natural way with customers, remembered names after one visit, made small talk without it feeling forced. I liked watching her work. I liked seeing her proud. Then came Sloan. Lena's cousin blew into town like a storm front from Austin, wearing ethically sourced linen overalls and a tattoo that said emotional equity in block script down her arm. The first time we met was over dinner at our apartment, and within 10 minutes, she asked me if I felt comfortable participating in patriarchal business models as a male partner. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. Lena just gave her a nervous laugh and passed the salad. Sloan started dropping by the boutique more often after that, offering what she called creative direction and vibe calibration. Her main suggestions involved repainting the walls a pastel peach and adding inspirational slogans on every mirror. "We need an affirmation nook," she said one day, arms spread like she was blessing the floor. "A space where customers can reconnect with their inner goddess while browsing." I asked what that meant, and she said it was about merchandising with emotional depth. I said we needed to actually sell clothes. She didn't laugh. Neither did Lena. What started as occasional input turned into daily interference. Suddenly, Lena wasn't showing me floor plans or budgets anymore. She was workshopping the brand identity, with Sloan and a rotating cast of influencer types who spoke in hashtags and used the word frequency like it meant something concrete. The boutique's Instagram became less about vintage finds and more about Lena herself. Post photos, filtered lighting, long captions about feminine power and business alignment. At first, I thought it was just part of marketing. But then the captions started to read like diary entries for an audience of strangers, and I realized I wasn't part of the story anymore. Our dynamic shifted. Slowly, then suddenly. She stopped asking for my thoughts, stopped showing me the books, stopped inviting me to pop-up events, and claimed they were too centered on feminine energy for me to attend. She started calling the boutique my store instead of our store, even in front of people who knew exactly how it had been funded. When I pointed it out, she said I was being controlling. "You don't own me just because you wrote some checks," she snapped one night when I asked why Sloan was using the company card to buy floral wall decals and essential oils. That sentence stuck with me, cut cleaner than she knew. I didn't want ownership over her. I just wanted respect for the partnership we had built. But every time I brought it up, she told me I was policing her vision or dimming her light. It wasn't even Lena talking anymore. It was Sloan, echoing through her like a loudspeaker, every sentence dripping with manufactured empowerment and prepackaged outrage. The boutique itself began to change in ways that made no financial sense. The denim section, once our bestseller, got moved to the back to make room for $70 candles named Sacred Rage and Burn the Patriarchy. Sloan convinced her to stock affirmation journals and handcrafted feminist tarot decks that cost more than our utility bill. The shop started looking less like a boutique and more like the lobby of a failed self-help retreat. Customers noticed too. The regulars who used to swing by every weekend stopped coming. Reviews online started dipping, some subtle, others brutal. One simply read, "Came for vintage." Left with a headache and a tote bag that told me I was the problem. I brought it up gently one night, sat across from Lena at our kitchen table, and said, "The numbers don't lie. We're losing traction. Maybe we should bring back some of the vintage focus." She didn't even look up from her phone. "You just don't get the aesthetic," she said. "Not everything's about margins and math." I told her I wasn't trying to squash her creativity. I just didn't want the shop to collapse. She rolled her eyes. "This is why Sloan says male energy always sabotages female growth." You're literally proving her point. I laughed, then stopped when I realized she wasn't joking. That night, I lay awake wondering how far gone this was. How long it had been since I'd seen the girl who used to excitedly show me fabric samples over takeout noodles. The girl who cried when we signed the lease. That version of her had vanished, and in her place was someone I barely recognized. It all came to a head on a Tuesday. I remember the date because it was the same day I'd signed a huge new client at the firm. I walked in the door ready to share the news, only to find Lena already waiting at the kitchen table, her hands folded, an expression unreadable. The engagement ring sat neatly between us, placed like an offering or a warning. "We need to talk," she said. Nothing good ever follows those 4 words, and this time was no exception. She told me she was leaving, said she was evolving, realigning, vibrating at a higher frequency, said I was part of a chapter she'd outgrown, that I was anchoring her to an outdated version of herself. I asked if this was about the boutique. She laughed, coldly this time, and told me, "Not everything's about your money, Caleb." I stared at her for a long time after that. Not with anger, just disbelief. I asked what she planned to do about the business. She shrugged. "It's my brand now. You were just the investor. You wouldn't understand the creative side." Then she stood, grabbed her bag, and left. No big blowout. No slammed doors. Just the sound of quiet footsteps and the click of a lock behind her. I sat there alone, staring at the ring and trying to remember where it all changed. Wondering if I'd missed the moment she stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as an obstacle. I didn't go to work the next day. I called in, said I was sick, which wasn't a total lie. It wasn't the kind of sickness you measure in temperature or coughs, but the heaviness in my chest made it hard to stand upright. I spent the whole morning in silence, walking through our apartment like it wasn't mine anymore. Her mug still sat on the counter, lipstick smudged on the rim, and a pair of earrings were on the dresser. Those giant brass hoops she used to hate, but recently adored. I stared at them like they were clues to something I'd missed, some warning sign I should have caught sooner. That afternoon, my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it, but the name on the notification pulled me out of my fog. It was my buddy Graham, sending me a screenshot from Instagram. "Dude, I'm sorry. Thought you should see this," he wrote. I opened it without thinking. There was Lena, standing in front of Found and Thread, sunlight behind her like some divine filter had been summoned just for the post. The caption read, "Sometimes, the strongest move is walking away from what no longer aligns with your higher self. Trust the process. #new chapter #selfmade." I read it 3 times before it hit me. She was already rewriting the story. In her version, there was no shared dream, no contract, no late nights with spreadsheets and invoices. She hadn't walked away from a relationship. We hadn't built something together. She'd apparently broken free from oppression. Comments flooded in. "Proud of you, girl. You're glowing. Keep rising. This is what real independence looks like." And from Sloan, of course. "You chose you. Never apologize for that." I dropped my phone on the counter and stared at it like it might detonate. That night, I opened my laptop and began gathering everything. Receipts, emails, bank statements, the signed partnership agreement, the copy of the lease with both our names, invoices with my credit card listed, the contractor quotes I negotiated, the down payment I wired. I wasn't doing it to be petty. I was doing it because I could feel something coming and I needed to be ready. A few days later, Graham sent another message. Man, she's saying some wild stuff in her private story, he wrote, then attached screenshots. One said, financial abuse is real. Just because it doesn't leave bruises doesn't mean it isn't violent. I'm reclaiming my freedom. Another showed a blurry selfie with the boutique behind her and the words, never again will I let a man hold power over my vision. I didn't know whether to laugh or throw something. She was painting me as some manipulative puppet master, as if I'd used money to trap her. The truth was, I never once asked for control. I offered help. I believed in her when banks wouldn't even give her a meeting. And now she was calling that abuse. I tried reaching out. She didn't answer the phone. My text got left on read. Then, mutual friends started going quiet. Some stopped replying entirely. Others sent vague, awkward messages, stuff like, hope you're doing okay, or I don't want to get in the middle. A few outright asked me, point blank, if what she was saying was true. When I asked what she was actually saying, I got vague paraphrase summaries that made me feel like I'd stepped into someone else's life. I met up with Graham in person, needing something grounded. Over beers, he leaned in and said, she's telling people you tried to take credit for everything, that you threatened to pull funding if she didn't do things your way, that you used money to control her. I blinked at him, stunned. I literally funded the whole thing so she could have creative freedom, I said. I let her run it however she wanted. He nodded slowly. I know, man. But it doesn't matter what actually happened. She's shaping the story now. I stayed quiet for a few days. I hoped it would blow over. Maybe she'd cool down, realize how unfair the narrative had become. But then my boss pulled me aside at work, said someone had called HR anonymously with concerns about my conduct toward a former partner. He wasn't accusing me of anything, just giving me a heads up. That was the moment I stopped hoping for things to calm down. That was the moment I called a lawyer. His name was Ron, and he was calm in the way that makes you feel like you're not actually losing your mind. He looked over my documents, flipped through the signed agreement, and nodded. You're in better shape than most, he said. You've got receipts, legal signatures, ownership rights. She can't erase you just because the relationship ended. I asked him what my options were. He said we could force a buyout, push for liquidation, or, if we wanted to keep it professional, I could simply assert my rights as co-owner and block any major decisions until the matter was resolved. Let's start with a letter, I said. Something formal. Clear. The letter went out 2 days later. Nothing aggressive, just a statement of my involvement and a reminder that business decisions required mutual consent. Her response came fast and loud. Not from her, but from a new lawyer she'd hired. Someone Sloan knew, of course. A guy who wrote blog posts about dismantling patriarchal capitalism and once gave a TEDx talk titled Gendered Economics in the Age of Late-Stage Masculinity. His reply was less a legal argument and more a manifesto. It accused me of trying to wield financial privilege to dominate a female entrepreneur and claimed that my investment came with coercive undertones. My lawyer read it and actually laughed. This isn't a legal argument, Ron said. It's a Twitter thread. While the legal back and forth dragged on, I still had access to the boutique's accounting dashboard. Lena had forgotten to revoke my login. I wasn't spying. I was looking at numbers. Numbers don't lie. Sales were plummeting. Her inventory wasn't moving. The most expensive items were the worst performers. Mass-produced t-shirts with slogans about power and identity, empowerment candles, overpriced notebooks. The denim, the stuff that actually sold, had been shoved to the back racks. The average transaction amount had dropped by almost 30%. She'd hired a social media consultant, another friend of Sloan's, who charged $75 an hour to build engagement. Engagement did go up. Likes, shares, followers. But revenue didn't budge. That's the thing about likes. They don't pay rent. Then I saw the real kicker. A $3,200 charge for a photo shoot involving 6 models, an in-house stylist, and custom backdrop rentals. It resulted in 0 additional sales over the following week. I nearly put my fist through the wall. The reviews were damning. People didn't hate Lena. They were just confused. One wrote, I came here for vintage pieces. Now it feels like a shrine to Instagram culture. Another said, was lectured on capitalism while trying to buy a jacket. Weird vibe. The writing was on the wall. She didn't know how to run the business without someone else handling the numbers, and I was no longer there to fix the mess. Then, one afternoon, Ron called me. She wants to meet, he said. No lawyers. Just the two of you. I asked what for. He said she'd been vague, but the tone suggested desperation. I agreed. I didn't know why. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I wanted to hear the words. Even if they were hollow. We met at a diner across town. Neutral territory. She looked tired, like something had been eating her from the inside. The carefully curated aesthetic was still there, but it felt brittle, held together with tape and stubbornness. She sat down, didn't order anything, and stared at the menu like it held answers. Then she looked up and said, "The boutique struggling. I need more capital." I almost laughed. I wanted to believe I misheard. "You're asking me for more money?" I said. "After everything?" She shifted in her seat, eyes flicking toward the window. "It wasn't personal. Things were just messy. I said things I didn't mean." I shook my head, slow and deliberate. "No, Lena. You said them very clearly. You let people believe I was abusive. You let our friends think I was some jealous ex who tried to crush your dreams." She blinked. "It was just social media. It's not real." I leaned in. "Tell that to my boss. Or my parents, who've been getting anonymous calls asking if they raised a misogynist." She didn't reply. After a long silence, she said, "I still believe in the store." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Good. Then you'll have no problem hearing the options. 1. We sell the boutique and split whatever's left. Based on our agreement, I'll walk away with the majority. 2. You buy me out. With interest. And you post a public correction, clarifying the truth." Her voice was barely audible when she said, "I can't afford to buy you out." I leaned back, folded my arms, and said, "Then I guess we both know where this is going." The boutique's Instagram went dark for 3 straight days, which was a first since the doors opened. No post photos, no hashtags about growth or goddess energy, no passive-aggressive quotes about breaking cycles. Just silence. Then, out of nowhere, a black square appeared on the feed with white text centered and minimal. The caption read, "Statement from Found and Thread." I didn't even have to click it to know what it was. The message underneath was written like a legal draft disguised as an apology. "In the interest of transparency, I want to acknowledge that this business was made possible through significant investment and support from my former partner, Caleb. I regret any statements or implications that may have misrepresented the nature of our early collaboration." That was it. No real admission, no apology. Just enough to settle the paperwork and keep me from taking her to court. My lawyer had written every word. The comments were exactly what you'd expect: confused, neutral, supportive, a little bit cold. A few people unfollowed. A few others asked vague questions like, "Wait, what's this about?" Sloan didn't comment at all. In fact, she disappeared completely, deactivated her page, pulled out of the boutique's branding updates, vanished from every tag. Someone, and it wasn't me, had finally taken a hard look at her social media past and compiled everything into a neat little digital dossier. Screenshots of problematic takes, offensive costumes, tone-deaf blog posts about privilege and vibrational wealth. The kind of content that people love to pretend doesn't exist until it gets pulled into the light. I later found out the one behind it was Nate, a guy we'd both known for years. He messaged me saying, "That girl had it coming. Been talking down to everyone like she's some walking TED Talk." And just like that, Sloan was over. Canceled by the same wave she used to ride on. In the aftermath, she unfollowed Lena, removed her from her contact bios, and when asked if she still worked with the boutique, she gave a cold, perfect response. "I can't ethically associate with businesses built on dishonesty." That was rich coming from her. With Sloan gone and Lena's circle shrinking by the day, the boutique started to quietly change. No announcements, no grand pivots, just a slow, almost reluctant rollback to what we'd originally built. The empowerment corner disappeared one morning like it had never existed. The vintage denim racks moved back to the front display. A sign offering handwritten affirmations with purchase got tossed. The boutique, now run solely by Lena, started resembling the version we'd dreamed up in our kitchen years ago, before things got twisted. Meanwhile, I stayed completely hands-off. That was part of the agreement. I kept my 55% ownership, but I wasn't involved in operations. My lawyer handled anything related to money or paperwork. Every month, like clockwork, a payment hit my account. Quiet, consistent, and late only once. That month, I got a note from her lawyer saying, "Apologies for the delay, bank error." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. 6 months passed. I stopped checking the boutique's feed. I didn't drive by the storefront. I didn't ask mutual friends for updates. When people mentioned her name, I shrugged and changed the subject. I wasn't bitter. I was just done. But then one day, while grabbing lunch downtown with a colleague, I ran into her parents at a small cafe 2 blocks from my office. I spotted them first. Her mother noticed me and froze for a beat, then smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile people give when they're proud. It was the kind of smile people give when they know they owe you something they can't ever repay. She hugged me, tightly, and without warning. Her eyes were wet when she pulled away. "We're so sorry," she said, voice low like she didn't want anyone else to hear. "We raised her better than that." I nodded, said it wasn't their fault, because it wasn't. They asked how I was doing, if I was dating again, how work was. We kept it polite. No one mentioned the boutique, though I knew they were thinking about it. After that, something shifted. I felt like the weight I'd been dragging around had finally fallen off. I took the payments I received and started funneling them into something better, a small investment fund I created for first-time entrepreneurs, people who actually needed a hand, not just a spotlight. I even set up an anonymous scholarship at my alma mater for students focused on retail innovation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I didn't talk about any of it online. No hashtags, no photos, no story posts. I wasn't interested in the narrative. I was interested in the results. And for the first time in a long time, things started to feel like they were moving forward. Then one night, out of nowhere, I got a call from Kira, a friend of a friend who used to run a vendor booth at Found in Thread during its early days. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I said sure, assuming it had something to do with her new clothing line. What she told me, instead, nearly made me choke on my drink. Lena tried to sell part of the boutique to a silent investor, she said. Told him she had full ownership. I blinked. Full ownership? Kira nodded. She faked a document. Try to make it look like you transferred your stake. My stomach dropped. I asked for proof. She had screenshots of messages from a vendor chat, including one from the investor who backed out the moment he realized the ownership documents didn't match the public records. I didn't hesitate. I called my lawyer the next morning. Ron was calm as always, but even he sounded surprised. Forging an ownership transfer is fraud, he said. Depending on how far she took it, it could be criminal. I asked what we could do. He said we had a few options: press charges, demand a legal audit, or reopen negotiations for a full takeover. I didn't care about punishment. I just wanted out. Within 2 weeks, Lena caved. She agreed to relinquish full control in exchange for avoiding legal escalation. The boutique was officially mine. I didn't want to run it. I didn't want to salvage it. I just wanted it gone. So I sold it, quietly, cleanly, and entirely, to a small regional chain that specialized in curated vintage retail. They offered a fair price and promised to keep the name if I allowed it. I told them they could call it whatever they wanted. On the day the storefront changed hands, I walked by for the last time. The new owners were already moving in new racks, repainting the walls, adjusting the lighting. A young woman inside held a clipboard and pointed toward the corner where the candles used to be. I didn't feel anything. No sadness, no regret. Just relief. Like closing a door that never should have been open in the first place. I never heard from Lena again. No texts. No emails. No passive-aggressive subtweets. She vanished just as quickly as she had exploded. The last thing I heard about her came secondhand through a vendor friend. She was living in a shared flat in the edge of the city, working part-time for a startup that made biodegradable shoes. The engagement ring I'd bought her now lives in a safety deposit box, locked away not as a keepsake, but as a reminder. A reminder that loving someone doesn't mean funding their fantasy. That investing in a dream is not the same as building something real together. And most of all, a reminder that when someone shows you who they are, you only need to see it once. I thought that was the end of it. The boutique, the drama, the slow public unraveling. I had sold the store, cashed the check, and walked away with my peace. My name was no longer connected to the brand, no longer attached to the whispers of feminist merchandising or identity-focused candles. For a while, I didn't even say her name out loud. I wanted to let it fade the way you let a nightmare dissolve after waking up, slowly and with intention. A few months later, I got a message from a woman named Dana, someone I didn't know directly, but her name rang a bell. She ran a small startup incubator affiliated with the local university, one of those grassroots organizations that helped first-time founders develop real business plans before throwing themselves at the market. She asked if I'd be open to speaking with a group of students about retail investments and startup risk management. I said yes without really thinking, maybe because it felt like a full-circle moment. Maybe because I wanted to believe some of this mess had served a purpose. I met with 10 students, each of them pitching different ideas: pop-up restaurants, mobile skincare units, eco-friendly gift boxes. One student even pitched a concept eerily similar to Found and Thread, minus the drama and affirmations. I listened, gave feedback, and told them the single most important rule I had learned the hard way. Don't confuse enthusiasm for capability. Passion isn't a substitute for execution. No one flinched when I said it. I never brought up Lena, never mentioned the boutique, never shared the real story behind my own failed venture. It didn't matter. What mattered was helping these students avoid the traps I hadn't seen coming. I left the session feeling lighter than I had in years. It felt like finally standing up straight after carrying something heavy for far too long. About a week later, I was having dinner with my colleague Marshall and his partner Imani, who also worked with small business mentorship groups. We got on the topic of branding disasters, and I told a sanitized version of my story, the tale of an anonymous boutique that crashed after prioritizing aesthetics over sustainability. Imani laughed and said, "You'd be shocked how many people treat branding like it's oxygen." I smiled but didn't correct her. I wasn't ready to name names. Later that evening, as we wrapped up dessert, I got a message from Nate. It simply read, "Check this out, Lena's back online." I hadn't looked at her social media in months. She'd been dormant, at least publicly. But sure enough, when I clicked the link, there she was, standing in front of a blank wall, holding a whiteboard, dressed like someone halfway through rebranding themselves again. The caption read, "Excited to share something that's been in the works for a while, my new business coaching series for visionary women entrepreneurs." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The comments were as ridiculous as ever. People I didn't recognize hyping her up like she was about to save the world. She was offering one-on-one alignment sessions, complete with access to her exclusive workbook titled Building from the Feminine, Wealth Through Intuition. The whole thing reeked of the same empty phrases that had brought the boutique to its knees, only now packaged for resale as advice. I shook my head and put my phone down. Some people don't learn. Some people just pivot their failure into another pitch. 2 days after that, I got an email from Dana, the startup incubator manager. Her message was casual but curious. She said someone had recently applied to their coaching directory using my name as a reference. That someone was Lena. I stared at the screen for a solid minute, unsure what emotion I was supposed to feel. Disbelief? Annoyance? A twinge of respect for the sheer audacity? Apparently, she had told Dana's team that I'd mentored her during the early stages of her boutique and played a supportive but non-controlling role in the brand's launch. She described me as an example of what healthy investor-founder relationships could look like. It was surreal. For months, she had weaponized my name behind closed doors, twisting my role into something toxic. Now, she was trying to turn me into a character witness. I called Dana immediately and set the record straight. I didn't go into detail, but I made it clear I would not be affiliated with her in any capacity. Dana, to her credit, didn't push. She thanked me for the honesty and said Lena's application had already raised a few red flags. "Honestly," she said, "you're not the first to raise concerns." A few nights later, I got an unexpected call from Freya, one of the friends who had distanced herself during the worst of the breakup. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year. She sounded awkward at first, but then she got to the point. "I wanted to say sorry," she said. "I believed a lot of stuff I shouldn't have. I didn't even ask for your side." I told her it was okay, though I didn't mean it completely. She asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, out of curiosity more than anything else. When we met, she told me what finally changed her mind. "I saw her at a networking event," she said, "and she was telling this guy, some startup investor, that she'd built her boutique from nothing but intuition and self-discipline. Word for word what she used to post. When someone mentioned you, she brushed it off and said you were just an ex who tried to claim credit after the fact." I laughed, bitter but unsurprised. "She never quits," I said. Freya looked embarrassed. It finally hit me how fake it all was. Over the next few weeks, other people started trickling back into my life. Friends who had pulled away during the chaos, now cautiously reaching out like dogs who remembered the last time they barked too loud. Some apologized. Some pretended nothing ever happened. I didn't hold it against them. People crave simplicity, and Lena's story had been cleaner than mine. I was the overbearing investor. She was the silenced visionary. Easy roles to understand. Easy lies to swallow. But that version of the story couldn't last forever. About 3 months after her coaching business launched, it started falling apart. Her site stopped updating. Clients began posting reviews saying they'd been ghosted after paying for sessions. Someone on Twitter shared screenshots of pre-written, personalized advice templates that had been sold to multiple people with identical language. Word got around that she wasn't delivering what she promised. Eventually, the entire brand collapsed under the weight of its own buzzwords. The final message I got from her came on a rainy Thursday in May. It was short, just 5 words. "Can we talk? Please, Lena." I stared at it for 10 minutes. I didn't respond. Because that's how it ends, I guess. Not with a bang, not with a confession, but with silence. Not the kind that hurts, but the kind that finally feels earned. I don't hate her. I don't wish her harm. I just don't want to give her another word, another moment, another chance to rewrite the truth. And that truth? It's simple. She took my money. She used my name. She bent the truth until it fit the image she wanted the world to see. But in the end, it wasn't enough. Because filters fade, narratives collapse, and eventually, even the best performance runs out of audience. I've moved on. The ring stays locked away. The lessons stay sharp. And the next time someone asks if I've ever invested in a small business, I'll say yes, with my time, my money, and my heart. And once was enough.